Hello, everyone. We're carrying on from our lesson about the middle way. We're going to be talking about the acts of supremacy and active uniformity, with our objective to explore the laws that brought in to fix the religious problem by Elizabeth. Your starter is to write down a definition for the words uniformity and supremacy. Now, the hint here is to break those words down to the root word. So look at supreme and look at uniform. What do those words mean? So take a few moments to write down your title, learning objective, and complete your starter. When you are ready, you can go ahead and resume playing the video, and we'll take a look at supremacy and uniformity. So looking at those words, uniformity and supremacy, think of the word uniform and supreme. Uniformity means all the same, no difference. Everyone's on the same page. And at school, we wear a uniform. Everyone looks the same, and we follow the same golden rules. There's no differences between year groups. Everyone follows those 6 golden rules. Everyone's on the same page. So at Crescix, we kind of do have an active uniformity, if you will. We have the golden rules and the uniforms that we wear. Supremacy, look at the root word supreme, the best above all else, leader, in charge. And we do have that in society and at school. We have teachers, we have the head teacher, we have Ofsted, and we also have Parliament, MPs, and the Prime Minister. So let's go ahead and open up our Elizabeth summary booklets to Unit 4. We're going to go to the very back to the glossary terms. We have the terms recusant, active supremacy, and active uniformity to sort out. So go ahead and pause the video now. You can use a textbook to have a look at those. When you feel that you're ready, you can resume playing the video and we'll take them up together. So you've had a chance to look at those 3 key terms. Let's start off with a recusant. It's a person who refused to attend church services. To recuse yourself is to remove yourself from a situation. So a recusant removes himself from church. Act of supremacy. Elizabeth became the supreme governor of the church. She didn't name herself as head of the church. She was very concerned that that would make the Pope quite angry. The Pope was officially the head of the church. So Elizabeth used this linguistic way of getting around it by calling herself the supreme governor instead of the head of the church. Effectively, she was the head of the church, but she wasn't going to give herself that label as she was afraid of upsetting the Pope and getting herself kicked out of the church entirely. And the act of uniformity. This is going to set out the rules for everyone to follow, such as days of worship, the language of the Bible, fines for recusants, the clothing that people would have to wear, and the decorations inside the church. So just go ahead and make sure we have those in our note. When you're ready, you can resume playing. So having a look at some of the context, we need to remember that Elizabeth became queen of a nation that was significantly divided by religion. You had the 3 major religions. You had Catholics, Protestants, and Puritans. The majority of people in England were Catholic, and they refused to adopt the new Protestant faith of Elizabeth. People were also frustrated by the constant changing of religion under the monarchs of Henry, Edward, and Mary, and Elizabeth was essentially fighting a losing battle and at risk of actually losing her position as queen. So for each monarch, we're going to write down their religion. So go ahead and pause the video now. You can use your textbooks. You can use the graphic here to try to remember what the faith of each monarch was. We'll pause it for maybe about a minute or so, write those down, then we'll take them up together. So having a look at the faith of each monarch. So we can see that Henry VIII, he started off as Catholic, then he wanted to get a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. The Pope said no. So he then just decided to leave the Catholic Church and make his own Church of England so he could get a divorce. So he started off Catholic, then became more Protestant. His son Edward was Protestant. His daughter Mary I was Catholic. And finally, Elizabeth was Protestant. So we can see Henry started off as Catholic, changed to Protestant. Edward kept it as Protestant. Mary changed back to Catholic, and Elizabeth was a Protestant. So we can see the constant changing in religion, and this is really starting to annoy people. Religion is the most important thing in their lives, and every time a new monarch comes into the picture, they're having to change the most fundamental thing about them, which is their faith. And a lot of people had enough change by the time Elizabeth was coming into power, and a lot of Catholics refused to adopt the monarch's new faith. Now, Elizabeth knows that she needs to bring the nation together, but people don't want to be brought together. She knows it's not going to be easy, given how important maintaining their own faith was. So she has a few options, and what we'll do is we'll record this table into our note. So our first option is to do nothing. Let the Catholics continue to worship in their own way, and the consequence of that choice would have religious divisions continuing to grow, a possibility of civil war. Elizabeth would lose favor with God and certainly wouldn't get into heaven. Her next option was to force all Catholics to give up their faith and become Protestants. Now, this would anger Spain. They were one of the nearest Catholic countries. The Pope may also excommunicate Elizabeth for persecuting Catholics, so not really a good choice either. And the last one is she could use her middle way approach to reach a compromise. So what she could do is have Catholics and Protestants attend the same church with elements from both faiths to keep everybody happy. So upon reflection, Elizabeth looked back at her three options, and she said, now, the first one's not very good. If I do nothing, I'm going to lose my position as queen. I certainly won't get into heaven. If I force people to become Protestants, this is going to anger Spain. We might go to war with them. The Pope might kick me out of the church. So my only real choice is to use that middle way approach to reach a compromise. So I'm going to have to make some rules, an act of supremacy and an act of uniformity to show people I'm in charge and here's the rules that you need to follow. So we can pause the video now. Let's get that table into our notes. When we're finished that, we're going to go into a bit of detail about the acts of supremacy and uniformity. So let's take a look now at the acts of supremacy and uniformity. So some of the points we need to get down is Elizabeth now became the supreme governor of the Church of England. Not the head of the church, even though she was the head of the church. She called herself supreme governor as to not make the Pope angry. All important officials, such as judges, lawyers, JPs, MPs, the clergy, they had to swear an oath to Queen Elizabeth and accept her royal title. So they had to say, Elizabeth, I recognize you as the Supreme Governor of the Church of England. If they refuse to do this 3 times, they could be executed. So there was certainly motivation for them to do it and to agree and say, yes, Elizabeth, you are now in charge. Bishops would be used to govern the new church. The Marian heresy laws, they were repealed. So these were the laws set up by Mary I. And the Church High Commission was established to ensure changes were implemented at the parish level. We're going to get into detail about this a little bit later, but Elizabeth had to make sure that these changes were being implemented. It was very hard for her to know in London if someone in High Wycombe was following her rules or not, so she had to devise a plan to be able to check up on that. The Act of Uniformity. So the 1552 Protestant Book of Common Prayer was to be used in all churches. The main point we need here is the Bible was to be in English. No more Latin Bibles that the Catholics liked. They were going to be in English now. And all church services were also going to be conducted in English. There was a compromise on the issue of the real presence during the communion services. So worshippers took the bread and wine, not as the body and blood of Christ, but to remember that Christ died for them on the cross. Catholics believed that the bread and wine were the body and blood. And this was something that the Act of Uniformity thought to kind of get rid of. Ornaments and decorations were allowed in the church, as long as they weren't too flashy. The clergy was to wear vestments, and that's like a very fancy robe that they would wear. The clergy were allowed to get married. And all clergy had to take an oath to use the new prayer book. So they had to promise to use that new prayer book. Everyone had to attend church on a Sunday and other holy days to participate in the new services. And if you didn't do that, you'd be known as a recusant. And you would be fined 1 shilling or 12 pence for every absence from a church service. And the monasteries founded by Mary I were to be closed down and their wealth was to be passed on to the crown. And this is known as the dissolution of the monastery, something that we'll look at on the next slide. So we'll go ahead and we'll pause the video now. We need to get down those 2 columns, just the highlighted points, nothing more. So make sure we have a title of Act of Supremacy, Act of Uniformity, get the highlighted bits. When you're finished that, you can resume playing the video. Now, if we think back to our study of America and the Civil Rights Movement, we know that the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, and blacks were now equal under the law, but people weren't following the law. This was no different in the 1550s. Elizabeth knew that if I pass the law or these acts of supremacy and act of uniformity, it doesn't mean people are necessarily going to follow them. So I need to follow this up with some royal injunctions or some further instructions on how to follow the rules of my act of supremacy and act of uniformity. Now, the royal injunctions set out these rules quite clearly for the clergy, but also for regular people to follow. And we need to know the following. We need to know that the clergy were ordered to denounce the authority of the Pope. They were to condemn Catholic practices. They were to identify and report any instances of recusancy to local JPs and to the Privy Council. And they were to ensure uniformity in church services across the country. Now, how would this be checked up on? Well, the visitations would be used, and this is where 125 commissioners, they travel around the country and they would inspect churches to make sure the new rules were being followed. So think of this as an Elizabethan Ofsted. So the commissioners come in, they have a quick look around, make sure that everything's on the up and up, make sure that, the Bible's in English, there's vestments, there's ornaments in the church. If everything's good to go, they report back to the Queen saying everything's okay in this church. If it's not, they would then have to have a meeting with the person in charge of that local church and ensure that those changes were then implemented. The Act of Exchange, so this followed on from actually laws passed by Henry VIII when he was king, but it went to take all the wealth away from the church. So what Elizabeth would do is she would take land away, and then she would force those bishops to rent it back from her. So not only was she gaining the land, but now she was gaining income from that land. And this exercised her authority over the church. This really set out her role as being the supreme governor. It showed that the church, although they're a powerful institution, they're not as powerful as the monarch. And the last thing that was done was called the 39 Articles of Faith in 1563. This essentially wrote down all the beliefs of the Church of England, and it condemned all those Catholic practices that were being removed from the church. All clergy had to swear an oath to follow the 39 Articles of Faith. So as we've done previously in the lesson, go ahead and write our title down of the royal injunctions, and you'll need to get down those highlighted points of information. Once you've done that, we can resume playing the video. Now, if you think back to our study of America, again, we're going to talk about the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. We know that when that law was passed, not a lot of people were happy with it, and there was a lot of uproar and rioting. This was no different in the Elizabethan era. Dozens of Catholic bishops refused to swear an oath to Elizabeth, and many of them were sacked or quit their jobs. The Pope, he was really unhappy with the perceived persecution of Catholics. Some English Catholics actually started planning assassination attempts on the Queen's life, and we'll get into some of those in Unit 5 in the Catholic Threat. Priests from Belgium and Flanders, they actually traveled to England in secret like spies, and they tried to spread the Catholic faith among those who were kind of, unhappy with Elizabeth, but not really willing to change faith on their own. So they were looking to turn people against the Queen and to resurrect the Catholic faith in England. So our final task for the lesson today is to read over page 53 and to make sure that we have that act of supremacy and act of uniformity table in our note. We already looked at it earlier, but just double check that that is completed. The next thing that you'll need to do is go into your Elizabeth summary booklets into Unit 4 and complete both of these tables. So we have one at the top of your page with the three main religious beliefs, and you can use page 50 in your textbook to answer that table. You then need to complete the table about the religious settlement, middle way, supremacy and uniformity, the royal injunctions, and the act of exchange. And your final task is to grab a Germany textbook and revise the challenges faced by the Weimar government. So you can make a mind map or a timeline to show these changes. And you'll do that on a separate sheet of paper, as it says in the instructions, because we'll be putting that into our Germany books. We won't have that information stored into our Elizabeth books. So we'll pause the video now. We'll leave this up on the screen for you to complete those tasks before the lesson ends.